Yes. All right, looks like we're on. Okay, welcome everyone to our Sunday afternoon sutta study. And let's see, especially happy to see some of my fellow bhikkhunis online. Ayamara Jina, respectful greetings. I appreciate your supportive presence here. Also happy to see Venerable Satima. And here in the Dhanasala, we have Venerable Dhammanusari has come back to us from Canada. Some of you may know her. So Venerable Dhammawara, Venerable Tavira, and Seminary Arya Dhammajivi are here with me, and among other friends here. Welcome to all. I am Bhikkhuni Kaccayana. I'm filling in for Ayasobana this afternoon. She had one teaching already this morning, which I think some of you may have attended, and she has another one this evening. And so I thought I would give her a break in the afternoon and join you for the sutta study. So welcome to all. And so the sutta we're going to talk about today is Majjhima Nikaya 26. Let's see, let me pull it up here. So it's called the Pāsarāsisutta, sometimes also known as the Ariyapariyesana Sutta, the noble search, the noble quest. So today is the waxing quarter moon. It's the half moon in the sky leading up to the full moon of Vesak, which will be next weekend. And that full moon of Vesak is one of the most important holidays for Buddhists, at least in Theravada Buddhism. It commemorates three great events in the life of the Buddha. That is his birth, his awakening, and his parinibbana, final nibbana upon passing away. And those are all said to have occurred under the May full moon. So we will be celebrating those events next weekend. And this weekend, in the lead up to that, we are commemorating, remembering the Buddha's own practice in preparation in advance of his awakening, reflecting on what was that practice that led to that great awakening. So I think Ayasobana this morning led you in a reflection, a meditation inspired by the incident under the rose apple tree. This is when the Bodhisattva, that is the Buddha before his awakening, the Bodhisattva as a child, he one day during the royal plowing festival, when his father, the king, was off ceremonially plowing the ground, opening it up for spring, he sat to the side of the festival under the rose apple tree and just spontaneously went into samadhi, went into the first jhana, and experienced the kind of very simple, very safe happiness that comes from that, from seclusion, from any kind of sensual pleasures, any kind of craving, seclusion from any kind of unwholesome states of mind. He saw that the mind could be free of those things and felt the bliss and happiness of that. So that event is remembered on this lunar quarter, the half moon leading up to the full moon of Vesak. Remember that rose apple, sitting under the rose apple tree. And then for this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit more about how that incident under the rose apple tree fits into the larger story of the Buddha's, or the Bodhisattva's quest for awakening. So the sutta we're going to read today is one telling, in his own words, of his own story, of how that came to be. So let me bring this up on the screen for us. This moment. Okay. So this is the Noble Quest, Majjhima Nikaya 26. We'll start reading. And this is it's a longer sutta. I'm not sure if we'll go through all of it, but we'll get as far as we get. So this is the backstory. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then the Buddha robed up in the morning and, taking his bowl and robe, entered Savatthi for alms. Then several mendicants went up to Venerable Ananda, that is the Buddha's personal attendant, and said to him, "Reverend, it's been a long time since we've heard a Dhamma talk from the Buddha. It would be good if we got to hear a Dhamma talk from the Buddha." So Ananda says to them, "Well then, reverends, go to the Brahmin Ramaka's hermitage. Hopefully you'll get to hear a Dhamma talk from the Buddha." So Ananda is going to arrange this for them. "Yes, Reverend," they replied. So then after the meal, on his return from alms round, the Buddha addressed Ananda. "Come, Ananda, let's go to the stilt long house of Nigada's mother in the eastern monastery for the day's meditation." "Yes, sir," Ananda replied. So the Buddha went with Ananda to the eastern monastery for the day's meditation. In the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat and addressed Ananda. "Come, Ananda, let's go to the eastern gate to bathe." "Yes, sir," Ananda replied. So the Buddha went with Ananda to the eastern gate to bathe. When he had bathed and emerged from the water, he stood in one robe drying his limbs. Then Ananda said to the Buddha, "Sir, the hermitage of the Brahmin Ramaka is nearby. It's so delightful, so lovely. Please visit it out of sympathy." The Buddha consented with silence. So Ananda knows the Buddha's schedule, knows his ways, that this is his life. He will go for alms in the morning. He will spend the day in meditation, and then he may be open for visits later in the evening. And Ananda is then facilitating that the Buddha can speak to those who wish to hear him. So this is part of his role and his skill to know when is the right time to connect the people with the Buddha. It's one of the things Ananda is praised for. Anyway, they go to the Brahmin Ramaka's hermitage. Now at that time, several mendicants, bhikkhus, were sitting together in the hermitage talking about the teaching. The Buddha stood outside the door waiting for the talk to end. When he knew that the talk had ended, he cleared his throat and knocked on the door panel. The mendicants opened the door. He entered, he sat on the seat spread out, and addressed them. "Mendicants, what were you sitting talking about just now? What conversation was left unfinished?" "Sir, our unfinished discussion on the teaching was about the Buddha himself when the Buddha arrived." "Good, mendicants, it's appropriate for gentlemen like you, who have gone forth out of faith from the lay life to homelessness, to sit together and talk about the teaching. When you're sitting together, you should do one of two things: discuss the teachings, or keep noble silence." So, and then he starts to give them a teaching himself. He's noticed that they said they were talking about him, and so he's coming in and he's going to tell his story, but in a very sort of impersonal way, somewhat. So he says, "Mendicants, there are these two quests, the noble quest and the ignoble quest." Sometimes this is translated as search, the noble search, the ignoble search. And what is the ignoble quest? It's when someone who is themselves liable to be reborn seeks what is also liable to be reborn. Themselves liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted, they seek what is also liable to do these things. And what should be described as liable to be reborn? Partners and children, male and female bondservants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, gold and currency are liable to be reborn. So it's going to go through the list of all these sorts of things that could be considered one's belongings. The partner and child is something we think of as a very close belonging, but also these things that are representative of wealth, like having servants, having goats and sheep and chickens and pigs and all of this. There's a note here about the golden currency and why are those liable to birth. So this is Bhante Sujato's note. He says, gold and money are subject to birth because they are produced by heat. This is a commentarial explanation. The word for gold here, one of several in Pali, is jatarupa, literally born form, that which is naturally beautiful. In the Upanishads, a newborn infant is to be fed mixed curd, honey, and ghee with a piece of gold, jatarupa, thus placing golden Vedic speech in him. So there's some association here, ancient, between gold and birth. Anyway, that's just a side note. Main point here is these attachments are liable to be reborn. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to being reborn, seeks what is also liable to be reborn. And what should be described as liable to grow old? Partners and children, male and female bondservants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, and gold and currency are liable to grow old. These attachments are liable to grow old. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to grow old, seeks what is also liable to grow old. Similarly, what should be described as liable to fall sick? Partners and children, all these things, they're liable to fall sick. So someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to falling sick, seeks what is also liable to fall sick. Same for what is liable to die. Same for what is liable to sorrow. Same as what is liable to corruption. Partners and children, male and female bondservants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, gold and currency are liable to corruption. These attachments are liable to corruption. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to corruption, seeks what is also liable to corruption. This is the ignoble quest. So let's pause here for a minute. Well, yeah, I guess just, do we recognize in ourselves that we seek these things? And, the Buddha here is really pointing out the downside of them. And yet we know these things, right? We know that we ourselves are going to get sick and old and die. And we know on some level, at least, that our loved ones and loved possessions will get old and sick and die or fall apart or break. But we continue to seek them anyway. So just want to invite any comment or reflection. Do you recognize this ignoble quest in yourself? And why do you think you do that? Yes. There's one over here. Come. You need to. We have a comment from Seminary Dhamma GV.
Thank you, Venerable. Even though it's an ignoble quest, but we all need them to survive until we go. Like even as a monastic, we need all of them. So we can't get away from not having them yet.
Well, as monastics, we give up the partner at least. But yeah, it's true that if one has children, then you're not giving up your children. You still are staying connected with them, and you're not. And yes, we do rely on wealth. We have to survive. We have to eat. We have to live. We need at least the four requisites of life and some kind of idea of happiness and comfort. We need some degree of that. So yeah, I mean, that's reasonable, right? We need something to live on, and these are the things that we live on, and how could we give them up? Of course, we're going to seek them because we are seeking more life and more comfort, right? Richard.
Thank you. Buddha describes that the fifth path factor of noble livelihood is perfected in the life of the monastic as one of few wants. So it's not that you don't have any wants, like you were just saying. There's some basic necessities that as human beings we all need, and so Buddha allowed those things. But the objective is to get to the point where that's, in a minimal way, that's all you want, like that. Also, I'd like to mention a certain hypothesis that I have about the Buddha's coming to these conclusions and leaving home. So we know that the Buddha's mother died shortly after his birth, and we can assume at some point in his life this became known to him, because in the ancient world, until modern medicine, half of all adult women died from childbirth. Didn't have to be the first one, it could be later ones, because they would get infections and other things. So this would have been quite common. And knowing that his own mother died in childbirth, and then also from the stories, his wife had just given birth. So he was probably very nervous in that process, like, oh, my mother died, maybe my wife is going to die now too, right? And so I think that kind of very much affected his mind, So when we read these things, right, why should I, who am subject to all these things, also seek after that which is subject? But also by doing that, you're putting this burden, like if you're a male, you're putting a burden on the female, that she may be killed in the process of having children and everything, right? Because you're attached to children, she's attached to children, whatever, right? So I think it's that that had a strong influence on the Buddha's mind, and why there's such a close connection to his first child being born, and then shortly thereafter he makes the final decision to go ahead and leave home. Anyway, it's just a hypothesis, but I think it, if you contemplate it, it seems to have some, basis in truth. Anyways, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm not sure if those here in the sala could hear that well enough. So I think you made 2 points. One was that the right livelihood of a monastic, we do have these wants, but it's to sort of reduce the wants as much as possible just to what is needed to survive. And that is our monastic right livelihood and the sort of the perfection of right livelihood. And then the other point was about the Buddha's inspiration here being tied to the early loss of his mother. His birth mother passed away 7 days after his birth, and he was then raised by his aunt, his foster mother. And then he himself left home shortly after the birth of his son, his first beloved son, and left his newborn baby and wife. I guess, just leaving home around the same time that his mother disappeared from his life when he was a child, and that that experience of that very early loss would have shaped his life and his view on things. So yes, I think that's good to keep in mind. This is one of those, we can see the dukkha in any human life. Any human life is going to have something like this at some point. But yes, the sort of specific thing about the birth of a child and then the departure, I think that's a good point, that for him that may have been one of the specific motivating factors. So thank you, Richard. Any other comments on this ignoble quest, or shall we go on and look at the noble? Okay. All right, let's go to the noble quest. What is the noble quest? It's when someone who themselves is liable to be reborn, understanding the drawbacks in being liable to reborn, seeks that which is free of rebirth, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment, themselves liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted. Understanding the drawbacks in these things, they seek that which is free of old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. This is the noble quest. And now the Buddha begins to tell his own story more directly. Mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, is one who is the Bodhisattva, I too, being liable to be reborn, sought what is also liable to be reborn. Myself liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted, I sought what is also liable to these things. Then it occurred to me, why do I, being liable to be reborn, grow old, fall sick, sorrow, die, and become corrupted, seek things that have the same nature? Why don't I seek that which is free of rebirth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment? So sometime later, while still with pristine black hair, blessed with youth, in the prime of life, though my mother and father wished otherwise, weeping with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, dressed in ochre robes, and went forth from the lay life to homelessness. So there's something very, very radical here in his choice. You know, who would even think that there was such a thing? Right? What is he, he's part of this society, and this family and this whole palace life that he's living in with the wife, with the child, with the parents, with the wealth and the responsibilities. And, it's interesting where he even got the idea that there could be something that's not liable to be reborn, grow old, fall sick, sorrow, die, and become corrupted. I think so much of the time we just don't think there's anything else. And that's why we're searching for those things. It's my take on it. But somehow he got the idea there's something different. It's possible to break out of this entire thing. And he went for it. And and very strongly, like in the prime of life, mother and father weeping, he decides he's going to go and do this. And he must have seemed a little crazy, a little wild. Who would do this? If anyone there is a parent, what if your child came to you and said this? I see Leon. Yeah. Yes. Okay. We have a question from Leon.
Bhikkhuni, some more question. Just as we're here with so many bhikkhunis, I've heard that I think his aunt was Mahapajapati, and she was the first to ordain, correct? In the woman's side, and I wonder, is there any reference to her knowing about any spiritual paths or talking to him about that as she raised him, that sort of maybe could have influenced? Is there any, I guess, reference to that in the suttas? Because it seemed like she must have had an inclination if she was the first to ordain after he got back and pushed that so hard. So,
yeah, good question. Certainly, she. So it talks about. Here in the sutta, it says his mother and father were weeping, and we just heard Richard pointed out that his birth mother had passed away already when he was a baby, but he was raised by his maternal aunt as his foster mother, and she later, after his awakening, once he came back home as the Buddha, she became the first to ordain as a bhikkhuni. She's the founding mother of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So yeah, what influence would she have had on him as a child that could have led to that result? I think that the texts don't say that very clearly, anything about that, though I think we can assume she had some influence on how he turned out, like a major influence of some sort. But there's the stories about him having like predictions and prophecies from birth that he was going to be this great being, and then his father, well, the prediction was that he would either become the greatest of kings or he would become a great spiritual leader. And his father was like, I want the king option. So his father went to great efforts to try to keep him away from anything spiritual and just keep him in the palace full of sensual pleasures for his whole life. That's actually that story is not actually how he tells his own story in the suttas. That sort of comes, some of those gaps get filled in later. He does explain that he had a lot of sensual pleasures, but the prophecy part, I think, is not actually in the suttas. Yes, we have another comment here. And Chintana also. Let me let Chintana say something, and then you can, because you've already had a question. Chintana, please.
This kind of off subject, but I'm curious, and I bet you know, who raised Mahajapati's son?
Right. So she had a baby around the same time as the Buddha was born, the Bodhisattva was born. And it said that she let somebody else nurse her own son so that she could nurse the Buddha.
Yeah. That's so hard to imagine. That here I'm giving away my child and taking on another one. That was quite a feat. All right. So I was just curious.
For the nursing, it's not that she didn't, that she gave him up forever. We do see that baby appear in the suttas. His name is Nanda, and he becomes a bhikkhu later on and does become an arahant. He needs some sort of strong talking to from the Buddha at one point, but he ordains and he fully wakes up. And actually, quite a lot of the Buddha's family members ordained and became arahants. Like almost all of his immediate family did eventually. So then his going forth was then allowing that possibility for them later. So that's actually, in some ways, like that's ends up being the greatest possible gift to his family, is that he did go forth and find the way and then was able to bring them along with it.
So mostly it was just to feed him. Mahajapati, I mean, that was the main purpose, that she gave up her child because you can't feed two children well, I'm sure, back then.
Right. I guess so. Yeah. So she found another wet nurse for her baby.
Okay.
But she did remain in his life. She raised them together. They were like brothers.
All right. Thank you.
Ananea, and then and then Dhammajivi.
Well, I think maybe as a bit of context, that most this it was it was a type of in their culture at that time. You had so Mahapajapati, whom became Mahapajapati, and her sister Maya, who gave birth to the Buddha, were both married to King Suddhodana.
Yeah.
And so that was the way it was done in those times. You'd have so his and King Suddhodana, his sister was married to his wife's husband. You know what I mean? It's like in that time, the way they did it is that you would have you'd have the family, you'd have a son and a daughter, and then that son married the sister's, his aunt's daughter. It was a kind of a system that we don't see this in modern times whatsoever. So the fact that Mahapajapati became took over as mother, even though she had just had a baby around the same time. There's a closeness there, or a bond there, that's a little different than what we might expect in modern time. Plus, you know, the Buddha was filled with sense pleasures, but he was completely schooled in the Upanishads and the Vedas and all of that stuff. He was completely thoroughly taught by the religious leader, you know, a person designated to school him. So by the time, so he's isolated, very much isolated until he sees the harbingers, you know, and sees for the first time that there is old age, sickness, death, etc. So and Mahapajapati also, of course, would have heard the same prophecies made. I mean, she was there when the sages were saying this about the Buddha, that he had this particular destiny. So while the king and queen, you know, wanted him to continue in the lineage, but she in particular had to know that that wasn't really how that was going to go. So I think the signs were there that even though he had all the sense pleasures, that he was fair. You know what I mean? He had a nature that was kind of remarkable, aside from other boys or children of his same age. So I think there were a lot of things going on that whole time. It wasn't just like, oh, send the baby to the nursemaid and I'll take over here. It was way, way, you know, more complex than all of that.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely family structures are not the same today as they were then. Do you want to say something? Okay. We have Seminary Dhammajivi again.
Thank you again. I just couldn't help. I just want to add this because the Bodhisattva, he basically cultivate, or was that since the time that he was predicted, like for incalculable eons and 100,000 eon ago, that and so for that time he's been building, cultivating his 10 parami, 30 paramis. So this is the time. So it's not that, you know, we wouldn't think, oh, I'm gonna look for another way, you know, maybe there's another way, you know, not dying, you know, not rebirth, you know, we wouldn't. But his parami has been rising so long. So that's what I was just thinking about.
Right. Yeah. So there are these stories about all the past lives of the Buddha and how much he had developed and how he had been committed to this path for so many eons. And so he had that kind of clue from all that. But it said, you know, in this lifetime, his last lifetime, he didn't like remember that. He didn't sort of have that in his mind. He had to he saw it later, but he didn't grow up thinking about it the whole time. You think he did? Okay. I mean, in this sutta, from his own words here, he's not mentioning that.
From what I understand, the unique about Buddha's birth is that he could remember even in his stomach, when he was in his mother's stomach's womb, he was still awake, still remember all of that. Unlike other where they forgot. So maybe in his teenage year or his early, but my understanding, many things.
Right. Yeah. So and yes, there is the story about when he was first born. Then he takes 7 steps and says, how he's the first in the world and that kind of thing. But you know, I think there is a sort of forgetting that happens with children. Even there are reports, stories of children who have memories of past lives, and you know, even in those stories, often they forget them by age 7 or something like that. So as far as, you know, this is the Buddha's words right here. He's telling his own story, and he's not saying, I made this declaration eons ago in front of the Buddha. Which Buddha was it? Kassapa? Or no, sorry. Dipankara. Yeah, right. I made the declaration in front of the Buddha Dipankara this number of eons ago, and I perfected my paramis, and now is the lifetime when I'm going to do this. He's not saying that in the sutta. He's not telling the story that way. That story exists. It's out there. That's in other places, but here in this story, in his own words, it's much more simple than that, but also a little bit like mysterious in a way. Like exactly, you're explaining like why did he feel so sure that there was something else that was worth seeking, that was worth giving up everything for. And yeah, in the way this story is told, then we might wonder, why is that? And then the other stories fill that in. It's like, oh, okay, he had been working on this since he saw the other great Buddha many eons ago, and has had this project over so many lifetimes. But in this lifetime, not remembering that somehow he had a conviction that it was possible, and that was really the only thing worth doing, was to seek what was noble and not what was just going to fall apart, no matter how beautiful and pleasant it may be. You know, they say that he really loved his wife. She was beautiful and wonderful, and he loved his child. And when the child was born, then he was so afraid, like, I'm going to get stuck. Because I love this child so much, I'm going to get stuck and not be able to find the way out of this cycle. But somehow he knew that there was something else. So anyway, so he decided he would go and seek what was noble, seek what was free from old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, from rebirth, supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. Right. So then he does it. But he doesn't know the way yet, not fully. He's not awake yet. He just knows that there's something worth seeking. And so he goes out and he looks, and his first step when he leaves home is to seek out some of the other great teachers of the time. So we'll go back to the sutta here and just sort of read through this part of the story. Once I had gone forth, I set out to discover what is skillful, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace. I approached Alara Kalama, this is one of the great teachers of the time, and said to him, Reverend Kalama, I wish to lead the spiritual life in this teaching and training. So this is a Brahmin teacher. And Alara Kalama replied, Stay, Venerable. So he's welcoming him to join the teaching and training that Alara Kalama is offering. Stay, Venerable. This teaching is such that a sensible person can soon realize their own tradition with their own insight and live having achieved it. Buddha says, I quickly memorized that teaching. As far as lip recital and verbal repetition went, I spoke the doctrine of knowledge, the elder doctrine. I claimed to know and see, and so did others. So he's memorized, he's learned, he can recite, he can repeat what the teachers have told him. But he knows he hasn't really realized it himself yet. It occurs to him, it is not solely by mere faith that Alara Kalama declares, I realize this teaching with my own insight and live having achieved it. Surely he meditates knowing and seeing this teaching. So I approached Alara Kalama and said to him, Reverend Kalama, to what extent do you say you've realized this teaching with your own insight? When I said this, he declared the dimension of nothingness. So the dimension of nothingness is one of the formless states, one of the that come after the jhanas, the first four jhanas, and then there's the realm of infinite space and infinite consciousness, and then nothingness. And so it's a very high level of concentration, of stillness, very high meditative attainment. Yes. 7. Sorry, the question was what number is that in the order of the jhanas? So it's number 7. So 4 jhanas, infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness. 7, yes. So anyway, Alara Kalama has attained to the dimension of nothingness, which is a very high attainment in terms of meditation. And he declares this to the Buddha, or the Bodhisattva at this point, the one who is seeking awakening but has not yet found it. And he says, then it occurred to me, it is not only Alara Kalama who has faith, energy, mindfulness, immersion. That's Bhante Sujatā's translation of samadhi, is immersion, being immersed in meditative absorption. It's not just Alara Kalama who has faith, energy, mindfulness, immersion, and wisdom. I too have these things. Why don't I make an effort to realize the same teaching that Alara Kalama says he has realized with his own insight? So these are the 5 faculties or the 5 powers that the Buddha teaches later: faith, energy, mindfulness, samadhi, and wisdom. And these are, if you have them and you develop them, they give a lot of power. They're sort of the basis from which you can achieve these sorts of, or attain these sorts of states. And they're things that we can all sort of see in ourselves to some degree. Maybe we're not equally strong in all of them, but they're approachable in a way. And so the Buddha has the insight that, I have these qualities too, and these are qualities that can lead me to something very strong. And so why don't I make an effort using these qualities to practice and realize the teaching that my teacher has given me? So he says, I quickly realized that teaching with my own insight and lived having achieved it. So that means he also is attaining to the dimension of nothingness here. And then he approaches Alara Kalama and says to him, Reverend Kalama, is it up to this point that you realize this teaching with your own insight and declared having achieved it? I have, Reverend, says Alara Kalama. And the Buddha replies, I too, Reverend, have realized this teaching with my own insight up to this point and live having achieved it. And Alara Kalama says, we are fortunate, Reverend, so very fortunate to see a venerable such as yourself as one of our spiritual companions. So the teaching that I've realized with my own insight and declare having achieved it, you've realized with your own insight and dwell having achieved it. The teaching that you've realized and dwell having achieved, I've realized. So the teaching that you know, I know. The teaching that I know, you know. I am like you, you are like me. Come now, we should both lead this community together. So this is, a respectable teacher, right? Someone who recognizes, and he's not trying to see like, oh yeah, I'm the best and nobody can be equal to me as a teacher. I'm the teacher, you're the student. It's like, no, he recognizes when somebody has that kind of strength and has the humility and generosity and appreciation for that, not to say, come lead this community with me. This is a good teacher, as they go among the teachers of the world at that time. So the Buddha says, this is how my tutor Alara Kalama placed me, his pupil, on the same position as him and honored me with lofty praise. Then it occurred to me, this teaching doesn't lead to disillusionment, dispassion, cessation, peace, insight, awakening, and extinguishment. It only leads as far as rebirth in the dimension of nothingness. Realizing that this teaching was inadequate, I left disappointed. So, again, he has some kind of very strong sense of what he's seeking, and that even this very high attainment, this very peaceful state, he can still see the downside in it, that it's not the real deal, not the end of suffering. It's just another pleasant abiding within this realm of things that are liable to rebirth and old age and death and all of this. So I want to pause here, see if anyone, yes, Richard. And Richard, are you able to come a little closer to your mic? It was a little hard to hear you before.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me better now?
It's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Maybe the setting got turned down accidentally. I don't know. Okay, there was a discussion earlier about a prediction being made a long time ago by, I pronounce it Dipankara, doesn't mean it's the right pronunciation, Buddha, that Buddha would be a future Buddha. A lot of that is commentarial and other stuff. Commentaries were written several hundred years after the Buddha passed away. The Jedika tales also, which tell a lot of this kind of stuff about Buddha being a bodhisattva for so many lifetimes. Those were also not developed for several hundred years after the Buddha passed away. And but we can go to the Samyutta Nikaya, the fifth book, the great book, sutta number 48, the yoke with a hole, where Buddha talks about, suppose it was the great earth become one mass of water, and a man would throw a yoke with a single hole upon it. An easterly wind would drive it westerly, westerly wind would drive it eastward, northerly would drive it southward, a southerly wind would drive it northward. There was a blind turtle which would come to the service once every 100 years. What do you think, bhikkhus? Would that blind turtle coming to the service every 100 years insert its neck in that yoke with a single hole? It would be by chance, Venerable Sir, that blind turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years would insert its neck into that yoke with a single hole. So too, bhikkhus, it is by chance that one obtains the human state. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have multiple human states in a row, but coming to human consciousness is what Buddha is talking about, okay? To where you become that kind of extra self-consciousness compared to animals. Like, it's very difficult for most animals to look in a mirror and think, oh, that's me. Only a few primates and a few birds can do that in human beings. So he says, coming to the surface, it would be by chance. And next he says, by chance that a Tathagata, an Arahant, a perfectly enlightened one arises in the world, by chance that the Dharma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata shines in the world. So Buddha himself here is saying that it's by chance that this happens. That's why it's so rare. It's not, there's no predestiny. If somehow or another an ancient Buddha knows the future, and he can say, okay, by predestiny, this is going to happen, and boom, at this time, you're going to, then that's predestined. And Buddha says, no, there's no predestiny like that. The universe is much too complicated. No one can truly predict the future. You might be able to infer a few things, modern science, whatever, or monetary system or something like that, tries to predict what kind of economic circumstances are going to happen. But for someone to know, trillions and trillions of years ahead of time that you're going to become a Buddha at a certain time, no. And that's why Buddha says it is by chance. So either the Buddha is speaking correctly here in the sutta, or somebody else is speaking correctly in a commentary or something like that. So I think we have to be very, very careful to understand, what is Buddha's real teaching and what are other people's speculations. And so anyway, I don't want anyone to feel bad. No one has to accept anything I just said, but I think we have to move away from these type of ideas that there's some kind of predestiny. There's no predestiny. You're just lucky, really. A lucky throw, as Buddha would say. He made a lucky throw. Anyways, thank you very much for listening.
All right. Okay, so Nari Dhammajivi would like to respond to that. I guess I would also like to say, you can go forward. All right, I'll let her say her piece, and then I'll say my reply.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think this is what makes this program very exciting. So very engaging. I appreciate your feedback, Richard. The prediction from the Buddha, the Dipankara, that's from the Buddha's wife, Apadana. That's what the prediction. That's where you can see the prediction, the very first part, sort of like the center of her Apadana, whereas the Buddha not only predict that the Buddhahood of the Bodhisattva, also predict her to be the to be the long life, the wife to be like the like-minded wife with similar conduct and virtue as the Buddha. And she was the one who perfected his paramis. So this is coming from Yasotara Apadana. Please go ahead and check. Thank you. It's in Tipitaka, not commentary.
Right. Yes, there is the whole Tera Apadana, Teri Apadana, which is part of the Pali canon, the original Sutta Pitaka. So not commentary, though I'm sure Richard will tell you that there are different strata in the early text, in the original text, that some are earlier and some are later. And it is believed that the Apadanas are later, as opposed to like the Teragata, Terigata are earlier. The Apadanas are thought to be later texts, but it's true that they are canonical. They're not commentarial, and that they do very much carry, they have these stories of the whole genre is the past lives stories of the Arahant disciples of the Buddha, where they tell about how they, they met a previous Buddha and had a great inspiration from that and made a vow, made a determination that they will, that they will wake up one day and that they will have some sort of special role, like one of them decides to be a Buddha. I will be a Buddha one day. Another one says, I will be the Buddha's attendant. I will be the Buddha's Bhikkhuni disciple, foremost in wisdom, right? Because they see somebody else being appointed to that role in that long ago past life, and then they are greatly inspired, and then they do great acts of generosity with the dedication that they will do that someday. So, so there is that whole canonical group of texts, and it's true that they are thought to be later texts than the very early strata. And it's true that there are some differences between the stories told there and the suttas that are thought to be earlier, like this one that we're reading today, which is, the Buddha's own story in his own words. And so then, then it's, again, how to approach these different texts and different stories. And of course, this is a matter of great faith for the great majority of Theravada Buddhists in the world, that these are the stories that have been told about the Buddha again and again, that these are for inspiration, that these are, even central to one's faith and inspiration in the Buddha. And so we want to honor that, whatever it is that brings us close to the Buddha in that way. I see more hands in Anjali here. So I want to honor what you said. Also, I want to recognize what Richard is saying about the different levels and ages of the texts, and that to have a certain respect and primacy for those texts that are coming like more directly from the Buddha's mouth, that we honor that because of that closeness. And I guess in terms of the idea of predestination, I feel like there's a way to bridge the gap, that it's not like fate. It's making a determination and continuing to work with that determination to create the kamma, life after life, that will allow one to go forward and to be developing the kinds of qualities that will lead to awakening one day. So it's, if one has been in an animal life for a long time, if you've been an ant again and again and again, in life after life after life, then to come up out of that and become a human one life, that would be unusual. That would be rare. That would be like the turtle, I think, coming up out of the ocean. And then the great benefit of the human life is that we are able to direct our kamma, that we are able to make choices about how we live, and that we are able to practice and make determinations about how we wish to continue going forward. And there's no guarantee about it until one attains to stream entry. There's no guarantee that you will have another human birth. But I think it's true that it's more likely, and that if one is making a determination towards something like Buddhahood and is consistently practicing with that goal in mind over lifetime after lifetime, that I think that is sort of, it's commensurate. It's not, I think it can to some degree match both of the versions of the story. But anyway, Venerable Tavira had hands in Anjali also. So this is a hot topic today. So thank you, Richard, for bringing us a hot topic.
I guess my thought was it's kind of similar to what Venerable Kaccayana said. When you have these predictions from an ancient Buddha, or you have one of the foremost disciples who was in the presence of an ancient Buddha and made a determination. It's like in both cases, there's this sense of like the potential being there at that time. Either the Buddha looking at the Bodhisattva and saying, you have the potential to be a Buddha, or someone looking at someone being named one of the foremost disciples and saying, I'm not that now, but I can see in myself the potential to develop towards that. And so it's not like it's fated, but when we look at this story of the Buddha and say, why, when he had this palace life and all of this potential for kingship, why would he say, I'm giving all of that up to go for this thing that is just theoretical, that no one else even knows is possible? But so it's like there's this idea of like but also you'll never achieve it unless you say, some part of me believes it's possible and I'm willing to go for it. And so I think, it's useful to have this sense of like these ancient arahants in their past lives, to have some recognition that like I have the capacity to develop towards something. And then that can give us the confidence to say, I also have the capacity to develop towards something that I am completely clear is not present in me right now, but I believe there's a capacity for it.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I think that, yes, that was more or less what I was trying to say. Thank you. Okay, any other comments here, or shall we move forward? Okay, good enough for now. Let's move on. So we've just seen the Buddha go to the first teacher, Alarya-Kalama, and attain to the same level of meditation that Alarya-Kalama did, be invited to lead the community together. And then he's like, no, this isn't it either. So again, he has some sort of internal something that tells him this isn't it. There's something else. And so he goes to another teacher. And just in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all of this, but basically the same thing happens. This other teacher is, let's see. Yes, this other teacher is teaching the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. That's number 8 for Leon's knowledge. So it's the next dimension higher in the standard order of the formless attainments. And once again, the Buddha memorizes this teaching and then realizes, okay, the teacher has probably realized this for himself. In this case, the teacher is actually the son of the one who had realized it, but that's a side point. So yeah, the current teacher is Uddaka, son of Rama, and Rama is the one who had realized the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. But the Buddha realizes what Rama did with his own insight and lives having achieved it. He goes and tells Uddaka, son of Rama, and Uddaka says, oh, you have realized the same as Rama did. Please lead our community. So Buddha has actually realized something higher than Uddaka himself. And Uddaka recognizes that and respects and says, please lead our community. It's so fortunate for us that you have realized this. And so again, the Buddha has had great success in this community and with this teaching, but he sees again, this teaching doesn't lead to disillusionment, dispassion, cessation, peace, insight, awakening, and extinguishment. It only leads as far as rebirth in the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. Realizing that this teaching too was inadequate, I left disappointed. I set out to discover what is skillful. He left his teachers. I set out to discover what is skillful, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace. Traveling stage by stage in the Magadhan lands, I arrived at the town of Sena in Uruvela. So this is quite close to where his ultimate awakening will be. There I saw a delightful park, a lovely grove with flowing river that was clean and charming, with smooth banks, and nearby was a village to resort to for alms. Then it occurred to me, this park is truly delightful, a lovely grove with a flowing river that's clean and charming with smooth banks. And nearby, there's a village to resort to for alms. This is good enough for striving, for a gentleman wanting to strive. So I sat down right there thinking, this is good enough for striving. He's found his spot. He's going to stay. And so, being myself liable to be reborn, understanding the drawbacks in being liable to be reborn, I sought that which is free of rebirth, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment, and I found it. Being myself liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted, understanding the drawbacks in these things, I sought that which is free of old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment, and I found it. So, knowledge and vision arose in me. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. Now there'll be no more future lives. So, this sutta, it kind of skips over part of the story, actually. There are other suttas where he sits down by the lovely river and says, this is good enough for striving. And then there's a long passage about all of the austerities that he is practicing during that time. And I'm going to switch over to another sutta that has this exact same thing, but then has the austerities there. This is Majjhima Nikaya 36, the Mahasacaka Sutta. There's like 3 other suttas where he tells the story up to this point and then tells more. Okay, so here we are in Majjhima Nikaya 36. He's found the delightful park with the lovely flowing river. He's sat down by the bank, thinking this is good enough for striving. And then these 3 similes, which were neither supernaturally inspired nor learned before in the past, occurred to me. Again, this is explaining, after sitting down, what did he do before he found that ultimate sublime peace? So he's contemplating these similes. Suppose there was a green sappy log, and it was lying in water. Then a person comes along with a drill stick, thinking to light a fire and produce heat. What do you think, Agivesana? So in this sutta, he's talking to somebody named Agivesana, a different sutta. By drilling the stick against that green sappy log lying in the water, could they light a fire and produce heat? No, worthy Gautama. Why not? Because it's a green sappy log and it's lying in the water. That a person will eventually get weary and frustrated. In the same way, the Buddha says, there are ascetics and Brahmins who don't live withdrawn in body and mind from sensual pleasures. They haven't internally given up or stilled desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and passion for sensual pleasures. Regardless of whether or not they feel painful, sharp, severe, acute feelings due to overexertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision of supreme awakening. So, this is the first example that occurred to him. Then a second example occurred. Suppose there was a green sappy log and it was lying on dry land, far from the water. Then a person comes along with a drill stick thinking to light a fire and produce heat. What do you think? By drilling the stick against that green sappy log on dry land far from water, could they light a fire and produce heat? Yes? I see a yes here. I see some uncertainty, shaking heads out in the, okay. Well, Akivesuna here says no. No, worthy Gotama. Why not? Because it's still a green sappy log, despite the fact that it's lying on dry land far from water. That person will eventually get weary and frustrated. In the same way, there are ascetics and Brahmins who live withdrawn in body and mind from sensual pleasures. So they're living a renunciate life. But they haven't internally given up or still desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and passion for sensual pleasures. And he's talking here about people who are doing austere practices of various sorts, causing themselves physical pain, but they have not really internally given up pleasure. They're still craving. Even though they've externally given it up, they're living without it, but they have not stilled that inside themselves. They're like the green sappy log on dry land. It's physically removed, but still full of those kinds of pleasures. Okay, suppose there was a dried up withered log and it was lying on dry land far from the water. Then a person comes along with a drill stick thinking to light a fire and produce heat. What do you think? By drilling the stick against that dried up withered log on dry land far from water, could they light a fire and produce heat? Yes? Is he nodding? Yes, yes. Yes, worthy Gotama. Why is that? Because it's a dried up withered log and it's lying on dry land far from water. So the conditions are there. In the same way, there are ascetics and Brahmins who live withdrawn in body and mind from sensual pleasures, and they have internally given up and stilled desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and passion for sensual pleasures. And then regardless of whether or not they are suffering painful, sharp, severe, acute feelings due to overexertion from austerities, they are capable of knowledge and vision, of supreme awakening. So it doesn't matter what austerities they're doing, really. What matters is that they have given up internally the desire and infatuation, thirst, passion for sensual pleasures. So the Buddha is describing what are the conditions under which awakening can happen, and what is the practice that leads to that. It's interesting that in this sutta, then he goes from this simile to talking about doing extreme austerities. The next thing is that he's describing how he basically tormented himself for several years, starving himself and holding his breath and just doing all sorts of things that were really destructive to the body. One of the notes here from Bhante Sujato says, this might be a textual corruption, that it should have been in the other order, where he does the austerities first and then later has the realization that those are not doing the right thing. But anyway, and that's based on it showing up in a different order in some of the other textual traditions. So the early Buddhist texts went to all different countries and some of them got translated into Chinese, and some of the Chinese ones have this a little bit different in its order. But in any case, his point here is that all the kinds of austere practices that he's doing, holding his breath until he has great pain, eating only a tiny amount until he's, destroyed the body, basically, cutting off food, eating so little, my major and minor limbs became like the joints of an 80-year-old or a dying man. My vertebrae stuck out like beads on a string. My ribs were as gaunt as the broken down rafters on an old barn. The gleam of my eyes sank deep in their sockets. My scalp shriveled and withered. Anyway, all of this. He thinks after he's done all of this, whatever ascetics and Brahmins have experienced painful, sharp, severe, acute feelings due to overexertion, whether in the past, future, or present, this is as far as it goes. No one has done more than this, unless they've died. But he's pretty much on the verge of dying. And he's like, this is it. This is what this practice does that I'm doing now, this austerities. But I have not achieved any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones by this severe, grueling work. So again, he has this intuition that what he's doing is not it. He's tried. He tried the sensual pleasures at home in his home life. He tried the meditative teachings of his first two teachers. He tried these extreme austere practices of that others also at that time were doing. All of this seeking the way to liberation based on this basic insight that there should be something else, something outside, realizing none of these ways are it. None of them are leading to knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. So here he asks, could there be another way to awakening? And this is when he recalls the rose apple tree. In Bhante Sujato's translation, it's a black plum tree. Not quite sure the difference. More traditionally, or most of the traditional translations say rose apple. But whether it's a rose apple or a black plum, he remembers the time when he was a child. It occurred to me, I recall sitting in the cool shade of a black plum tree while my father, the Shakyan, was off working. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, I entered and remained in the first absorption, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. So this is the standard description of the first jhana. He has spontaneously entered the first jhana as a young child sitting under this tree. And he's remembering it now when he's, on the verge of death from having starved himself and tortured himself. And he asks, could that be the path to awakening? That experience as a child, could that be it? And stemming from that memory came the understanding that is the path to awakening. It occurred to me, why am I afraid of that pleasure? Again, he's been running from pleasure. He's been torturing himself. He's been doing everything that isn't pleasure. But he's remembering this particular pleasure under the rose apple tree. And it occurs to him, why am I afraid of that pleasure? For it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unskillful qualities. Then he thought, I'm not afraid of that pleasure. It has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unskillful qualities. It's free from those. And then he realized, I can't achieve that pleasure with a body so excessively emaciated. Why don't I eat some solid food? And he does. And then he doesn't. There's backstory here that is told in other places, that there's a young woman named Sujata who comes by at that moment, and she's made a special offering of milk rice that she's going to give to a deva at a nearby shrine, but she sees him there and she offers him the milk rice instead, and he eats it and feels that energy and life coming back. And then this is what will power him into his awakening, not long from now. Anyway, I see Richard has had a hand up for a little while. Would you like to comment something here?
Thank you. I'm going to try to speak louder. Here the Buddha says that he remembers an earlier time in his life when he attained first jhana. Now, this is very important to understand why this doctrine of Bodhisattva, this was a clue to me, why this doctrine of Bodhisattva before this life is not taught by the Buddha anywhere in the suttas. Any time earlier in Buddha's life before he attained Buddhahood, he describes himself as a Bodhisattva, starting with that beginning of the sutra when he leaves home. When I was just a bodhisattva and I began to think, why should I, who am subject, I'm just paraphrasing it, to old age, disease, and death, also seek after that which is subject to old age, disease, and death. But here, when he describes himself as a young boy who wasn't thinking philosophically or anything, he just fell into, that's it. He just fell into the first jhana almost accidentally. If you notice, he doesn't say, and then I remembered when I was a young bodhisattva, one day sitting under a rosehip, which is very typical for him when he's describing his past. In between that time that he starts getting the urge to understand things philosophically and go forward. That's when he starts describing himself as a bodhisattva, not any time before that. And this is a very easily seen confirmation of that. I literally did a study one time and I searched all the 4 main Nikayas for every place where Bodhisattva appears. And I read through those suttas, and that's when I saw this pattern. And that he doesn't call himself a Bodhisattva until he starts thinking those philosophical thoughts. Because that's when he starts thinking there must be a way to nibbana, a way to end this, samsara, this pattern of birth and death. Anyways, that's just my opinion. People can accept or reject as they see fit, but it might be worth it to someone if they really want to understand this, to do that same type of study like I did in this particular case. Thank you very much for listening.
Leanne, yes.
That's good. I have heard many I guess people's interpretations of what the Buddha was talking about when, like, how he found the middle way, taking like that, or like some people say renunciating the asceticism, some people say like changing it to the middle way, because he like took like the path between, pleasure and suffering or whatever. And I've heard it said that he saw that the ascetics were getting some sort of purification from the pain. That's like why they did it, is because they were like, at first it was for some other reason, but then they were like, oh wait, this is doing something and making me better somehow. So they're finding that. And so when he tried that and found the middle way, I heard it said that he kind of refined it to say pain times equanimity equals purification, or pleasure times equanimity equals purification. That is the formulaic way, weird way to say that, but I just wondered if there was any places in the actual suttas, because this is like not sutta that I'm talking about, where he kind of clarifies that like if you do a high determination sit where he sits and is still for days, that kind of pain that comes from that, if you have really high equanimity with it and that pain is really high and the equanimity is really high, that's going to have a lot of purification. And I don't know if that kind of thing I've heard is in the suttas. So that's a good question.
Okay. I think basically I want to say no. At least not with that level of detail about
not the equation.
That equation is not there. Certainly equanimity towards pleasure and pain is important on the path, and is also I think a result of insight is that there will naturally be such equanimity, but exactly the parameters of that and how should you gauge your practice in that way is not, there's not a lot of discussion of that, or at least not as precisely as what you're talking about in the formulaic way. So yeah, I mean, the Buddha, in terms of like the pleasure and pain part, I think you can see what he's pointing at by looking at the way that he told people to live. Like what Richard was saying earlier about how like the monastic life is sort of the ideal of renunciation, that it has like the right, just enough that you can live and carry on and not be in pain all the time, that there's actually no benefit whatsoever to pain. Pain in itself is not beneficial. Pleasure in itself.
The idea of like using pain to purify past karma is like
Yeah, right. That's it. Yeah. Okay. There's some.
You're like burning off past karma. It's like I think that may have been like.
Okay, there's some side conversation happening here that the Zoom people can't hear. So Venerable Tavira is mentioning that it's a Jain idea that burning off past karma through painful austerities is effective and can burn off past karma. And that is sort of precisely what the Buddha was doing with these austerities, is he was trying to follow that path of saying like, okay, pain is helpful because it helps to purify. And what he finds is that it's actually not. So, it's true that some pain is unavoidable. Just by having a human body, you're going to have pain sometimes. And for the pain that is unavoidable, then to develop equanimity is very important. But you don't need to seek out extra pain. There's no benefit to seeking out extra pain. Just to try to purify yourself that way. That's part of what he learned in the middle way. For the pain that does arise, then to develop equanimity towards that is important.
Does he just really outline
that? Yes. Oh. Yes, the suttas do outline that. Okay, so Richard has another hand up. I want to give others a chance too, though, if there's any other. And we're over time, so let's see. Are there any? Richard, do you have a? I'll give you a last comment here, and then we'll come to see if we can come to a closing with this.
Thank you. I just want to make a point. I believe it's in the very first sutta when Buddha's talking to the 5 ascetics. He tells them that all the austerities he did, he attained no higher knowledge or distinction. Distinction would be some kind of mystic power or something like that, above ordinary human existence. So basically, he says that that's completely useless. That whole idea that you're going to torture yourself is completely useless, and it's just a distraction. That really using jhana as a way to develop your mind, and then through analysis of Dhamma, you have a breakthrough. Okay, it's usually translated a breakthrough to wisdom, but it's a breakthrough to understanding. You come to understand reality, exactly as it is. Anyways, I don't want to talk too long because it's late, but thank you very much for listening.
All right. So thank you. Anyway, I want to just sort of get through to let's finish our story of how he woke up here. We're really close. We're back. I've switched back to the Noble Search Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya 26 again. Having had that interlude about the austerities, which is missing from this sutta and is in the other suttas. So he sits down by the bank, says it's good enough for striving, does the austerities there, has the realization that has been useless, and has the memory of the sitting under the rose apple tree, developing concentration that is free from sensual pleasures, free from all kinds of unwholesome states, and that freedom itself, the getting rid of those things and experiencing what is it like to be without them, that is a safe and wholesome pleasure that is onward leading. And he develops that. He develops insight. It mentions that he sees his past lives and the lives of others, and then he sees the end of craving. And that's what he's talking about, that whole sequence, which I think we'll talk more about next week when we're actually on Vesak and the real full details of the awakening. But that's what he's talking about here when he says, being myself liable to reborn, understanding the drawbacks and being liable to reborn. I sought that which is free of rebirth, the supreme sanctuary from the rogue extinguishment, and I found it. And I found it. being myself liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted. Understanding the drawbacks in these things, I sought that which is free of old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment, and I found it. Knowledge and vision arose in me. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. Now there'll be no more future lives. So he's done. He's done what had to be done. He's free from all of this. He found it. He found what is noble. And this sutta goes on. We won't go on. It tells about how he then became inspired to teach, despite the difficulties of teaching. And yeah, let's see, where do we end here? It's all about his teaching attempts. Anyway, he went on to teach. His teaching was effective. And it has been passed down to us today. And so we don't have to, we don't have to find it ourselves. He's done this search and told us the results and told us that it is possible and told us how. And we can follow that. And so that is, just the most amazing gift to us, to the world. So honoring the Buddha, our original teacher, and all the arahants who came after him, who have carried this, the Sangha who's carried this down to the present day, and us as the Sangha today who are hopefully carrying this forward. So appreciating all of you being part of this great flow of the practice of the teaching going forward into the world. And Anumodana, appreciating all of you being here today. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank you, Aya.
We close here by paying our respects to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Suwakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Great. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you.